Mafia boss hears manager humiliate black waitress when he entered the hotel. His brutal response will shock you. I don't care if you were busy with other tables. When I say jump, you ask how high. That's how this works. The young black waitress stood frozen, her eyes downcast as the hotel manager continued his public humiliation. You're right, it won't happen again, the manager sneered, his voice deliberately loud enough for everyone to hear. Because one more mistake and you'll be back serving greasy food in whatever neighborhood you crawled out of. No one moved to help her. No one dared to speak up. The other staff averted their eyes, pretending not to notice as their colleague was degraded in front of wealthy hotel guests. No one except for the man who had just walked through the revolving doors. A man whose very name made people tremble in the city. A man who built his empire on fear and respect. Enough. The single word cut through the air like a blade. The manager turned, irritation flashing across his face at the interruption. Sir, this is a staff matter. I assure you everything is. I said enough. The man stepped closer, the distance between them shrinking to something intimate and threatening. Is this how you speak to all your employees, or just the ones you think can't fight back? Have you ever witnessed someone being publicly humiliated and felt that burning desire to step in, but couldn't find the courage? Imagine having all the power in the world, the kind that makes people tremble at the mere mention of your name, and using it not for personal gain, but to defend someone who can't defend themselves. I'm Lucy, and welcome to Lucy Love Stories, where we share tales that not only entertain but remind us of the humanity that connects us all. If you believe that true power lies in how you treat those who can do nothing for you, hit that like button right now. In the amber glow of twilight, the Meridian Grand Hotel stood like a sentinel against the city skyline, its marble facade and gleaming windows promising luxury to those who could afford it. For Dominic Vega, it was just another establishment in a city he controlled from the shadows, a city where his name was whispered rather than spoken aloud. He hadn't planned to visit the hotel that evening. His empire of carefully constructed businesses and strategic alliances rarely required his physical presence anymore. But something had drawn him here tonight, perhaps the simple human desire to move through the world unnoticed, to observe rather than be observed. As he entered through the revolving doors, Dominic kept his posture relaxed, his expensive suit blending perfectly with the clientele. The lobby hummed with quiet conversation and the gentle notes of a piano. No one gave him a second glance, exactly as he preferred. That's when he heard it. A voice cutting through the ambient sounds, sharp with contempt. I don't care if you were busy with other tables. When I say jump, you ask how high. That's how this works. Dominic paused, his attention drawn to the far corner of the lobby where a man in a tailored hotel manager's uniform stood towering over a young woman. Her server's uniform was immaculate, her posture rigid as she absorbed the verbal assault. This is the third time this week you've embarrassed this establishment, the manager continued, his voice deliberately loud enough to carry. Do you know how much that couple at table 7 spends here monthly? More than your yearly salary, I'd wager. The young woman, Amara, according to her name tag, kept her eyes downcast, her hands clasped tightly before her. I apologize, Mr. Whitfield. It won't happen again. You're right, it won't, Whitfield sneered, glancing around to ensure he had an audience. Because one more mistake and you'll be back serving greasy food in whatever neighborhood you crawled out of. Something cold settled in Dominic's chest as he watched the scene unfold. He recognized the calculated cruelty in Whitfield's words, the deliberate humiliation designed to establish dominance. It was a tactic he'd seen countless times in his world, but there, at least, the targets were men who had chosen that life, who understood the rules. This was different. This was a man with a small measure of power wielding it like a weapon against someone who couldn't fight back. To understand why this scene affected Dominic so deeply, we need to go back to the streets of East Harbor where young Dominic Vega learned the harsh lessons that would shape the man he would become. Born to immigrant parents who worked themselves to exhaustion in the city's factories, Dominic grew up understanding that the world wasn't fair. His father, once a respected professor in his home country, now cleaned office buildings at night. His mother, who had dreamed of being a doctor, instead worked double shifts at a laundry service. "Remember, Mijo," his father would tell him, "in this world, people will try to make you feel small. They will judge you by your accent, your name, the color of your skin. But true power comes from here." He would tap Dominic's chest. "From knowing who you are when no one is watching." At 12, Dominic witnessed his father being humiliated by a store manager who accused him of shoplifting, simply because he'd been examining a watch he hoped to save up for as an anniversary gift. The police were called. His father was handcuffed in front of the entire store, despite his protests and the receipt for the items he had already purchased. "Please, I have done nothing wrong," his father had pleaded, his accent thickening with distress. "Check my receipt, please." The store manager had smirked. "They all say that. I know your type." Young Dominic never forgot the look in his father's eyes that day, not fear, but a deep, resigned dignity. The charges were dropped, of course. There had never been any theft. But the damage was done. Something broke in his father that day, and something hardened in Dominic. "Why didn't you fight back?" Dominic had asked his father afterward, his young voice tight with anger. His father had looked at him with tired eyes. "Fighting back isn't always about raising your fists, Mijo. Sometimes it's about surviving today so you can build something better tomorrow." By 16, Dominic had begun building his own path to power, first through street smarts, then through calculated risks, and finally through a network of businesses that straddled the line between legitimate and otherwise. By 30, Dominic Vega had become a name that opened doors and closed mouths throughout the city. But unlike many who rose to his position, Dominic never forgot where he came from. He never forgot the lesson of his father's humiliation. In his world, a world often governed by violence and intimidation, Dominic established one unbreakable rule: respect was non-negotiable. Not just respect for him, but respect for everyone who worked for him, from his highest lieutenants to the cleaning staff at his clubs. Those who violated this principle didn't last long in Dominic's orbit. Now, at 42, Dominic stood in the Meridian Grand, a hotel he had no official connection to but, like most establishments in the city, operated within his sphere of influence. And he was watching history repeat itself. The Meridian Grand wasn't just any hotel. Built in the 1920s and renovated to maintain its Art Deco splendor, it represented old money, old power. The kind of place where deals were made over brandy, where politicians met donors away from prying eyes, where the city's elite could pretend the rest of the world didn't exist. For the past 5 years, the hotel had been under the management of Richard Whitfield, a man who had climbed the hospitality ladder through a combination of charm directed upward and cruelty directed downward. To the hotel's wealthy patrons, he was the perfect manager, deferential, attentive, seemingly capable of making any problem disappear. To his staff, he was a tyrant whose mood swings and prejudices determined their daily experience. Amara Johnson had been working at the Meridian for just under 6 months. With a degree in hospitality management and dreams of someday running her own boutique hotel, she had seen the Meridian as a stepping stone, a prestigious name to add to her resume. What she hadn't counted on was Whitfield's immediate and inexplicable dislike of her. From her first day, he had scrutinized her work more closely than any other employees, assigned her the most difficult guests, and criticized her in front of colleagues for infractions that others committed without comment. When she had applied for an assistant manager position that opened up 3 months into her employment, a position she was qualified for, Whitfield had laughed in her face. "Let's be realistic," he had said. "Our clientele has certain expectations about who serves them and who manages them. Know your place." The message was clear. In Whitfield's Meridian, Amara's place was at the bottom, regardless of her qualifications or performance. Tonight, the tension had finally boiled over. A wealthy regular had complained about the timing of his meal, a delay caused not by Amara but by a backup in the kitchen. But Whitfield, as always, had found his target. If you've ever been in Amara's position, powerless in the face of someone abusing their authority, you know the helplessness she felt. And if you're wondering what happens when someone like Dominic Vega decides enough is enough, stay with me. The most satisfying part of this story is just beginning. Dominic moved closer, his steps unhurried but purposeful. He caught fragments of Whitfield's continuing tirade, comments about Amara's appearance, thinly veiled references to her race, suggestions that she should be grateful for the opportunity to work in a place like this. And frankly, Whitfield was saying, his voice dropping to a theatrical whisper that was meant to be heard, we both know you're only here because of those diversity quotas the board insisted on. So perhaps a little gratitude instead of incompetence would be enough. The word wasn't shouted. Dominic never needed to raise his voice to command attention. It cut through the air like a blade, precise and deadly. Whitfield turned, irritation flashing across his features at the interruption. Sir, this is a staff matter. I assure you everything is. I said enough. Dominic stepped closer, the distance between them shrinking to something intimate and threatening. Is this how you speak to all your employees, or just the ones you think can't fight back? Recognition dawned slowly on Whitfield's face, not of Dominic personally, but of what he represented. Power recognizes power, even when it doesn't know its name. Sir, I don't know who you are, but I'm the general manager of this establishment, and You're nothing. Dominic's voice remained conversational, almost pleasant. You're a small man with a small mind who thinks a title gives you the right to treat people like they're beneath you. The lobby had fallen silent, the pianist's fingers frozen above the keys. Amara stood perfectly still, her eyes now raised, watching the scene with a mixture of confusion and something that might have been hope. I don't appreciate your tone, Whitfield attempted, his confidence faltering. If you have a complaint about how I manage my staff, you can take it up with. With who? Dominic smiled, the expression never reaching his eyes. The owner? That would be Meridian Hospitality Group, wouldn't it? Interesting coincidence, I had dinner with their board chairman last week. It wasn't entirely true, the dinner had been 3 months ago, but the effect was immediate. Whitfield's face drained of color. You're lying, he whispered. Dominic reached into his pocket and withdrew his phone. Shall we call him? I'm sure Marcus would be fascinated to hear how you're representing his brand. Whitfield's eyes darted around the lobby, seeking allies and finding none. The staff who had scattered earlier were now watching with barely concealed anticipation. For years, they had endured Whitfield's tyranny, his petty cruelties, his favoritism. Now, finally, someone was challenging him, and not just anyone, but someone who clearly held more power than he did. This is ridiculous. You can't just walk in here and... I can do whatever I want, Dominic replied, his tone making it clear this wasn't bravado but simple fact. That's the difference between us. Now, I believe you owe this young woman an apology. I will not be dictated to by some. Dominic's hand shot out, gripping Whitfield's wrist with precise pressure. To onlookers, it might have appeared like a friendly gesture, but the manager's sudden pallor suggested otherwise. An apology, Dominic repeated softly. And then your resignation. Effective immediately. You can't. I already have. Dominic released his wrist and stepped back. Your security access has been revoked. Your email has been suspended. And there's a car waiting outside to escort you home. The truth was, Dominic had done none of these things yet. But as Whitfield's eyes widened in disbelief, Dominic made a subtle gesture to one of the men seated in the lobby, a lieutenant who had been positioned there not because Dominic had planned this confrontation, but because Dominic never went anywhere without eyes and ears in place. The man immediately understood, stepping outside to make the necessary calls. By the time Whitfield tried to access his email or security card, they would indeed be deactivated. Dominic's network was nothing if not efficient. How could you possibly? The same way I know about the creative accounting in your expense reports. The same way I know about the complaints from female staff that mysteriously disappeared from HR files. Dominic straightened his cuffs, a casual gesture at odds with the intensity of his gaze. The same way I know that your wife thinks you're working late tonight, when you're actually planning to meet someone at the Westbrook Hotel in an hour. This information had come not from any prior investigation. Whitfield had never been important enough to warrant Dominic's attention before tonight, but from a quick text to his information broker while Whitfield had been sputtering his protests. In Dominic's world, information was currency, and he never ran short. The manager's face crumpled, the last vestiges of his authority evaporating. Now, Dominic continued, the apology. Whitfield turned to Amara, his voice barely audible. I apologize for my behavior. Louder, Dominic instructed. So everyone who heard you humiliate her can hear you apologize. I apologize for my behavior, Whitfield repeated, his voice cracking. It was unprofessional and wrong. Dominic nodded toward the exit. Your things will be sent to you. I suggest you use your sudden free time to reflect on how you treat people who can't immediately hurt you back. As if on cue, two men in suits appeared at the lobby entrance. They didn't look particularly threatening, their suits were well cut, their postures relaxed, but something about their presence made Whitfield move toward them without further protest. The lobby remained silent as the former manager was escorted out. Only when the revolving doors had completed their rotation did the collective breath of the room release. Dominic turned to Amara, his expression softening slightly. Are you all right? She nodded, her composure remarkable given the circumstances. Yes, sir. Thank you. Don't thank me for basic decency, he replied. No one deserves to be spoken to that way, especially not someone just doing their job. Still, she said, meeting his eyes directly for the first time, not many people would have stepped in. That's the problem, isn't it? Dominic glanced around the lobby, noting how quickly the other guests had returned to their conversations, the incident already fading from their concern. Too many people willing to watch injustice rather than risk their comfort. Amara studied him with newfound curiosity. May I ask who you are, sir? Someone who remembers what it's like to be powerless, he answered simply. And who promised himself he'd never become like the people who made him feel that way. Before she could respond, the young man from reception approached, his steps hesitant. Sir, he began, the hotel would like to offer you our finest suite for the duration of your stay, complimentary of course, as a token of our appreciation for doing what any of you could have done? Dominic finished for him. The receptionist flushed with shame. I don't need special treatment, Dominic continued. What I need is to know this won't happen again. Not to her, not to anyone else working here. Of course, sir. I'll personally ensure. No, Dominic interrupted. She will. He nodded toward Amara. Effective immediately, Ms. Amara is your new assistant manager. I trust the paperwork can be arranged? The receptionist blinked rapidly. Sir, there are protocols, interviews. Consider this the interview. She passed. Dominic turned back to Amara, whose expression had transformed from composure to shock. Unless you're not interested in the position? She began, then straightened her shoulders. I am. Very much so. Good. Dominic reached into his jacket and produced a business card, blank except for a phone number embossed in silver. If anyone gives you trouble about the promotion, call this number. But I don't think that will be necessary. As he turned to leave, Amara called after him. Sir? You never told me your name. Dominic paused, considering. Names had power in his world, power he rarely gave away freely. But something about her steady gaze, the dignity she'd maintained even under Whitfield's assault, made him reconsider. Dominic, he said finally. Dominic Vega. Recognition flickered in her eyes, not fear, but understanding. In this city, certain names carried weight beyond their syllables. Thank you, Mr. Vega, she said quietly. Not just for the promotion, but for seeing what was happening when no one else would. The world is full of people who look without seeing, he replied. Be the one who sees, Amara. That's worth more than any title. If you believe that standing up for others is one of the most powerful things we can do, hit that like button and subscribe to Lucy Love Stories. The most revealing part of Dominic's character is about to unfold, showing us what true power really means. With a slight nod, Dominic continued toward the exit, aware of the whispers already beginning to ripple through the lobby. By morning, the story would have spread throughout the hotel, how Dominic Vega had appeared like a specter of justice, how Whitfield had been removed, how the waitress had risen in a single evening. Some would call it interference. Others, intimidation. But for Dominic, it was simply a correction, a reminder that power without respect was nothing but tyranny, and that true strength lay not in dominating the vulnerable, but in defending them. As he stepped into the cool evening air, his phone vibrated with a message from his lieutenant. Whitfield situation handled. Permanent or temporary? Dominic considered the question as his driver opened the car door. The manager's behavior hadn't been criminal, not in the legal sense. In another time, Dominic might have simply taught him a lesson about respect and moved on. But he thought of Amara's eyes, the quiet dignity she'd maintained while being publicly humiliated, and made his decision. Permanent, he typed back. Make sure he never works in hospitality again. And set up a trust for the staff education fund at the Meridian. Anonymous donor. As his car pulled away from the hotel, Dominic gazed out at the city lights. He had built his empire on fear, on respect demanded rather than earned. But tonight had reminded him of something essential, that true power wasn't measured by who you could destroy, but by who you chose to protect. In the shadows between legality and justice, Dominic Vega had carved out his own moral code. And tonight, at least, he could sleep knowing he had honored it. The next morning, Amara arrived at the Meridian Grand an hour earlier than her usual shift. The events of the previous evening still felt surreal, like a dream she might wake from at any moment to find herself back in her server's uniform, Whitfield's contemptuous gaze following her every move. Instead, she found an email confirming her promotion to assistant manager, effective immediately, with a substantial salary increase. The hotel's HR director had called her personally at 7 a.m., apologizing for the unusual circumstances but assuring her that the paperwork was being processed with the full support of the board. Apparently, Mr. Vega made quite an impression on our chairman, the HR director had said, her voice carrying a note of nervous respect. He called Marcus Harrington directly after leaving the hotel last night. As Amara stepped into the lobby, now dressed in a tailored suit rather than her server's uniform, she noticed the immediate change in how the staff regarded her. There was curiosity, certainly, and perhaps a touch of envy from some. But mostly, there was a newfound respect, not just for her new position, but for what she represented, the possibility of justice in a place where it had long been absent. Ms. Johnson, the head concierge, greeted her, extending his hand. Congratulations on your promotion. We're all very pleased. Thank you, Robert, she replied, noting how he had never used her first name before today. I'm looking forward to working with everyone in this new capacity. If there's anything you need as you settle in, please don't hesitate to ask." As she made her way to what had been Whitfield's office, now hers, at least in part, Amara caught snippets of conversation among the staff. Whitfield's name was mentioned with barely concealed satisfaction. Dominic Vega's name was whispered with awe. "I heard he owns half the city. My cousin works at his restaurant downtown, says he treats his staff like gold." Did you see Whitfield's face when Vega grabbed his wrist? I thought he might faint. The office was exactly as Whitfield had left it, his personal items still scattered across the desk. A framed photo of himself shaking hands with the mayor. An expensive fountain pen set. A leather-bound planner open to yesterday's date, with a 9 p.m. appointment at the Westbrook Hotel circled in red. Amara sat in the large leather chair, running her fingers along the polished mahogany desk. For years, she had worked toward a position like this, earning her degree while working full-time, applying for promotions only to be passed over for less qualified candidates, enduring subtle and not-so-subtle reminders that people who looked like her weren't meant for management. And now, because a man she had never met before last night had decided to intervene, everything had changed. The question was, what would she do with this opportunity? Across town, in a penthouse overlooking the harbor, Dominic Vega was having breakfast with his sister, Elena. 10 years his junior, Elena had escaped the hardships that had shaped Dominic's early life. He had made sure of that, using his growing influence to provide her with opportunities he had never had, private schools, college, a legitimate business career untainted by his more questionable enterprises. "So," Elena said, spreading jam on her toast, "I heard about your visit to the Meridian last night." Dominic raised an eyebrow. "News travels fast. It does when my brother decides to fire a hotel manager and promote a waitress on the spot." She smiled. "The hospitality industry is small, Dom. People talk." "He deserved worse than firing," Dominic replied, his voice hardening at the memory. "The way he spoke to her reminded you of Dad," Elena finished for him. "I know." Dominic nodded, surprised as always by his sister's perceptiveness. It was like watching it happen all over again. That same calculated humiliation. That same abuse of power. And you couldn't let it stand. Would you have? Elena considered this, her expression thoughtful. "No. But I might have handled it differently. Less dramatically." "Dramatic solutions tend to be remembered," Dominic said. "Not just by Whitfield, but by everyone who witnessed it. Sometimes a lesson needs an audience to be effective." "And the promotion? Was that part of the lesson too?" Dominic sipped his coffee. "That was something else." She had applied for the position before and been rejected. Whitfield made it clear it was because of her race. "So you corrected an injustice." "I balanced the scales, that's all." Elena studied her brother, seeing beyond the hardened exterior to the boy who had once promised their father he would build a world where respect wasn't determined by power or privilege. A promise he had kept, in his own complicated way. "You know," she said carefully, "there are more conventional ways to fight injustice. Ways that don't involve intimidation or threats." "Those ways take too long," Dominic replied. "And they rarely work for people without money or connections. Still, you can't personally intervene every time someone is treated unfairly." "No," he agreed. "But I can when it happens in front of me. And I can create consequences severe enough that others might think twice before doing the same." Elena couldn't argue with that logic. For all his questionable methods, her brother's moral compass had always pointed true when it came to protecting the vulnerable. It was why, despite knowing the nature of his business, she had never been able to condemn him entirely. "Well," she said finally, I hope your new assistant manager appreciates the opportunity." "She will," Dominic said with certainty. "I recognized something in her. The same thing I saw in you when you were younger, that hunger to prove yourself, to rise above the limitations others try to impose." "Is that why you gave her your private number? Another stray to add to your collection of people you've decided to protect?" Dominic smiled slightly. "I doubt she'll need my protection again. She has her own strength. She just needed someone to clear the path." Back at the Meridian, Amara was discovering exactly what that cleared path might mean. The morning staff meeting, usually a tense affair under Whitfield's leadership, had transformed into a collaborative discussion. Ideas that had previously been dismissed were now being considered. Concerns that had been silenced were now being addressed. Ms. Johnson, one of the housekeeping supervisors, ventured, "We've been having issues with the laundry service. The quality has declined, but Mr. Whitfield refused to consider changing vendors because the owner is his golf partner." "Let's review our options," Amara replied. "If there are better services available within our budget, we should explore them." "And the scheduling issues for the front desk staff?" another employee asked. Mr. Whitfield insisted on understaffing during peak hours to cut costs, even though it affects guest satisfaction. "We'll revise the scheduling model," Amara promised. "Guest satisfaction and staff well-being should be our priorities, not short-term cost savings that damage our reputation." As the meeting progressed, Amara realized that Dominic Vega had given her more than a promotion. He had given her the chance to create the kind of workplace she had always believed was possible, one built on respect, fairness, and recognition of merit rather than privilege. If you believe that one person standing up against injustice can create ripples that change many lives, hit that like button. And if you want to see how Amara uses her new position to transform the Meridian Grand, and what happens when Dominic Vega's path crosses hers again, subscribe to Lucy Love Stories and leave a comment sharing a time when someone stood up for you when you needed it most. After the meeting, Amara found herself alone in her new office, processing the whirlwind of changes. On her desk sat a small envelope that hadn't been there earlier. Inside was a handwritten note. "Ms. Johnson, the board has approved a discretionary budget for staff development initiatives under your direction. Use it wisely. M. Harrington, Chairman." Attached was documentation for a substantial fund, the same education trust Dominic had instructed his lieutenant to establish anonymously. Amara smiled, understanding the connection immediately. Dominic Vega's influence extended far beyond the dramatic confrontation in the lobby. Over the next 3 months, the Meridian Grand underwent a transformation that few could have predicted. Under Amara's leadership, staff morale soared. Guest satisfaction ratings climbed to their highest levels in years. The toxic culture that Whitfield had cultivated was gradually replaced by something healthier, a workplace where performance was recognized, diversity was valued, and respect was the foundation of every interaction. Amara implemented a mentorship program using the education fund, helping staff advance their careers within the hospitality industry. She revised scheduling practices to ensure fair treatment. She created a system where guest complaints were addressed without public humiliation of employees. Word spread throughout the city's hospitality community. Former employees who had fled Whitfield's tyranny began applying to return. The Meridian became known not just for its luxury, but for its exemplary workplace culture. As for Richard Whitfield, his fall was as swift as it was complete. True to Dominic's instructions, he found himself blacklisted from every major hotel and restaurant in the city. His attempts to secure positions in neighboring cities were met with polite rejections. The industry's whisper network had ensured that his reputation preceded him wherever he applied. 6 months after that fateful evening, Amara was working late, reviewing plans for the hotel's upcoming renovation, when her assistant informed her that a guest had requested to see her personally. "Mr. Vega is in the lobby," her assistant said, a note of awe in her voice. "He asked if you might have a moment to speak with him." Amara felt a flutter of surprise. Though Dominic Vega's name had become something of a legend among the staff, the mysterious benefactor who had changed the course of the hotel's history, he had not returned to the Meridian since that night. She found him seated in one of the lobby's elegant armchairs, looking exactly as she remembered, composed, observant, radiating a quiet authority that needed no announcement. "Mr. Vega," she greeted him, extending her hand. "This is an unexpected pleasure." Dominic rose, taking her hand with a slight smile. "Ms. Johnson. Or should I say Director Johnson? I hear congratulations are in order." Amara nodded, unable to suppress her pride. "The board approved my promotion to hotel director last week. It seems they're pleased with the changes we've implemented. As they should be. The Meridian's reputation has never been stronger. Would you like to join me for a drink?" she offered, gesturing toward the hotel's bar. "I owe you that much, at least." "You owe me nothing," Dominic replied, but followed her nonetheless. Seated in a quiet corner of the bar, away from curious eyes and ears, they spoke not as powerful man and former waitress, but as two people who understood something fundamental about the nature of respect and dignity. "I've been following your progress," Dominic admitted. "Not interfering, just observing." "Through your connections with Chairman Harrington?" Amara asked with a knowing smile. "Among others. I was curious to see what you would do with the opportunity." "And? Have I met your expectations?" Dominic considered her question. "You've exceeded them." The mentorship program was particularly inspired. "I wanted to ensure that what happened to me under Whitfield wouldn't happen to others," Amara explained. "That qualified people wouldn't be held back because of prejudice or politics. A worthy goal. One I couldn't have achieved without your intervention that night." She studied him curiously. "May I ask you something personal, Mr. Vega?" He nodded, his expression open. "Why did you really step in? You could have ignored what was happening. Most people would have." Dominic was silent for a moment, weighing how much of himself to reveal. "When I was 12, I watched my father being humiliated by a store manager who accused him of theft because of his accent, his appearance. No one stepped in. No one saw him as worthy of defense." "I'm sorry," Amara said softly. "I promised myself that day that if I ever had power, I would use it differently than those who had used it against my family." He met her gaze directly. "When I saw Whitfield treating you that way, I saw my father all over again. And I saw myself in all those people who looked away." "So you didn't look away?" "No. And neither have you, from what I've heard. You've used your position to protect others, to create opportunities. That's a rarer form of power than mine." Amara smiled. "Different forms of power for different circumstances. Sometimes you need someone to dramatically clear the path. Other times, you need someone to quietly build a better road." A philosopher as well as a hotel director, Dominic observed with a hint of amusement. "Just someone who's learned that true authority comes from how you lift others, not how you keep them down." They talked for another hour, about the hotel, about the changes in the industry, about their shared belief that workplaces should be built on respect rather than fear. As their conversation drew to a close, Dominic reached into his jacket and produced an envelope. "I came here tonight for a specific reason," he said, sliding the envelope across the table. "I'd like to offer you a position." Amara raised an eyebrow. "I'm quite happy at the Meridian, Mr. Vega." "I'm aware. This isn't about leaving the Meridian. It's about expanding your influence." Inside the envelope was a proposal, an invitation to join the board of a new foundation dedicated to workplace equity in the hospitality industry. Funded by an anonymous donor, though Amara had little doubt about the source, the foundation would provide scholarships, mentorship, and legal support to workers facing discrimination or harassment. "We need someone with first-hand experience," Dominic explained. "Someone who understands both sides of the power dynamic and has the vision to create meaningful change." Amara read through the proposal, her mind already racing with possibilities. "This is extraordinary. Is that a yes?" "It's a definite yes." She looked up at him with newfound respect. "You're not at all what people say about you, are you?" Dominic smiled enigmatically. "I'm exactly what people say about me. And something else entirely." As they parted ways in the lobby, Amara extended her hand once more. "Thank you, Mr. Vega. Not just for tonight, but for 6 months ago. For seeing what was happening when everyone else looked away." "Thank you for proving me right," he replied, clasping her hand firmly. "For showing that sometimes, all people need is for someone to remove the obstacles in their path. And sometimes," she added, "they need someone to remind them of their own worth." Dominic nodded, a rare genuine smile crossing his features. Perhaps that's the greatest power of all. As he walked out through the revolving doors, Amara watched him disappear into the night, a man whose reputation inspired fear, but whose actions had given her the chance to rebuild not just her career, but an entire workplace culture. In the grand lobby of the Meridian, where 6 months earlier she had stood humiliated and powerless, Amara Johnson now stood as its director, proof that sometimes justice arrives in unexpected forms. And that true power isn't measured by who you can dominate, but by who you choose to lift up when they've been knocked down. 1 year to the day after Dominic Vega had walked into the Meridian Grand and changed the course of many lives, the hotel hosted a gala celebrating the launch of the Hospitality Equity Foundation. Industry leaders from across the country gathered to support its mission. Former kitchen staff now in management positions shared their stories. Housekeepers pursuing degrees through the education fund spoke about their dreams. And in a quiet moment away from the crowds, Amara found herself standing beside Dominic, both of them watching the success their unlikely alliance had created. "Your father would be proud," she said softly. Dominic looked at her in surprise. "What makes you say that?" "Because you didn't just survive today to build something better tomorrow," she replied, echoing the words he had once shared with her. "You made it possible for others to do the same." As they looked out over the gathering, people whose lives had been changed because one man had refused to look away from injustice, they shared the unspoken understanding that sometimes the most powerful act isn't in wielding authority, but in using it to ensure that others never have to endure what you once did. And in a city where power was often measured in fear and control, Dominic Vega and Amara Johnson had created a different kind of legacy, one built on the radical notion that every person deserves to be treated with dignity, regardless of their position or title. That night, as the gala concluded and the guests departed, the Meridian Grand stood transformed, no longer just a symbol of luxury and privilege, but a testament to what can happen when someone with power chooses to use it not for themselves, but for those who have none. If this story touched your heart, please hit that like button and subscribe to Lucy Love Stories. Remember that you don't need to be a powerful mafia boss to stand up against injustice. Sometimes all it takes is one voice saying enough to change someone's world forever. Share in the comments a time when you stood up for someone else, or when someone stood up for you when you needed it most. Until next time, this is Lucy, reminding you that the greatest power we have is how we choose to treat each other.